My brother stole my girlfriend from me. My family took his side. 8 years of silence, and suddenly they want to see me. But not because of love, because of my inheritance. My name is Tyler, I'm 25, and I live in Washington State with my wife Kelsey and our 1-year-old daughter Ellie. Our life is quiet, predictable in the best kind of way, filled with soft mornings, messy dinners, and the kind of love that settles deep into your bones. We have a small home tucked near the edge of town, the kind where neighbors wave when they pass by and the sound of our daughter's laughter fills every corner. It's not extravagant or flashy, but it's ours and it's peaceful. Something I never had growing up and something I promised myself I'd build when I got older. But a few weeks ago that peace cracked open with a single message, one I never expected and honestly never wanted. It was from my mom. The woman who walked out of my life over 8 years ago without looking back, without leaving a forwarding address, without a single explanation that made sense. I hadn't heard her voice in nearly a decade, hadn't seen her handwriting, hadn't even let myself wonder where she might be. And yet, there it was, glowing on my phone screen late at night. Her name, followed by a message that simply read, "Can we talk?" When I was 17, my entire sense of trust cracked in two the day I found out that my twin brother Logan had been secretly seeing my girlfriend, Brooke. It wasn't just a one-time mistake or some fleeting moment of weakness. They had been meeting behind my back for months, carrying on a relationship in shadows while I sat in blissful ignorance, still believing I was in love with someone who loved me back. I would have never known if one of her friends hadn't come forward, visibly uncomfortable, and told me the truth in a voice laced with guilt. At first I didn't believe it. I couldn't. Logan was my brother, my twin, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world, and Brooke had been my first real love. But the evidence was undeniable, and once I saw the signs, it was like every moment between us unraveled at once, each memory tainted by betrayal I hadn't seen coming. I was furious in a way I had never felt before, a kind of blinding rage that pulsed through my chest and made it impossible to think clearly. When I confronted Logan, all the betrayal and heartbreak exploded in a single moment, and I hit him. Just once, but it was enough. Enough to make him stumble, enough to feel the weight of what he had done, enough to release everything I'd been holding inside. But it wasn't just him who turned on me after that. My parents, who had always painted themselves as fair and level-headed, didn't ask for details, didn't want to hear my side. They stood in the living room, cold and unwavering, and told me I had two choices: leave the house immediately or they would call the police. No discussion. No second chances. So I left. I packed what I could into a duffel bag, walked out the front door, and never looked back. The only person who supported me through it all was my Aunt Karen, my dad's younger sister, the kind of woman who never needed to raise her voice to make you feel safe. When she heard what had happened, she didn't hesitate for a second. She drove up from Portland, helped me gather the rest of my things from the house while my parents stayed behind a closed door, and took me back with her like I had always belonged there. She didn't ask for an explanation or question whether I had done something to deserve it. She just opened her home and made space for me in her quiet, steady way. Over time, she became my second mom, the one who showed up to school meetings, who sat across from me at dinner and asked how I was really doing, who helped me find my footing when everything else had fallen out from under me. In her home, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a problem that needed fixing. I felt like I mattered. I transferred to another school in Portland, far away from the memories and faces that had once made me feel like a ghost in my own life, and slowly began to rebuild. I focused on my studies, kept my head down, and with Karen's constant encouragement, I managed to graduate and get into college. I chose electrical engineering not because it was easy but because it gave me something to focus on, something I could control and build with my own hands. Somewhere along that journey, I met Kelsey, smart, grounded, and with a laugh that somehow made everything feel lighter. We fell in love without drama, without games, and for the first time in my life, I experienced a relationship built on respect and honesty. We got married, bought a modest house nestled near the woods, and a year ago, we became parents to Ellie, our little girl who has my eyes and her mother's spirit. And just like that, piece by piece, my life began to make sense. Over the years, I heard nothing from my parents, not a single call, not a text, not even a passing message through extended family. Logan disappeared completely, as if cutting me out was the easiest part of betraying me. My older brother Ryan and my sister Madison followed suit, falling in line with the silence, choosing loyalty to the family image over reaching out to the one person who had been cast aside. Birthdays passed, holidays came and went, and through it all, there was never a word. Then, out of nowhere, just a few weeks ago, my mom messaged me for the first time in 8 years. Her words were short, casual, wrapped in false warmth that stung more than silence ever had. "We would love to see you, Kelsey and Ellie, for Christmas." Then, as if perfectly timed with my mom's message, I received friend requests from Ryan and Madison on Facebook. Two names I hadn't seen light up my screen in years, not since the day I was pushed out of our family like I had never belonged there in the first place. At first, I just stared at the notifications, unsure whether to laugh or feel sick. 8 years of complete silence, of missed milestones, of them pretending I didn't exist, and now suddenly they were reaching out like nothing had happened, like the years between us hadn't been carved out by betrayal and abandonment. It felt off. Too coordinated. Too convenient. The sudden warmth, the unexpected digital embrace, it didn't feel like love. It felt like a setup. Like I was being pulled into something I hadn't agreed to. Kelsey refused to go, and she didn't sugarcoat her feelings when I showed her the message and the friend requests. She looked at me with that steady gaze of hers, the one that always cuts through noise, and said, "I'm pregnant, and I'm not going to sit at a holiday table with people who abandoned you." There was no anger in her voice, just quiet conviction, and the moment she said it, I knew she was right. She had seen firsthand what it took for me to rebuild my life after they pushed me out, how hard I had worked to be the kind of man and father they never believed I could be. She had stood by me through every flashback, every pang of doubt, every holiday that passed with an empty inbox. And now, just because they decided it was convenient to pretend the past hadn't happened, didn't mean we owed them our presence. I turned to Aunt Karen, needing someone who had always told me the truth, someone who wouldn't soften the edges just to make me feel better. When I asked her what she thought was going on, she was silent for a long time, her expression unreadable, the kind of pause that tells you the answer is going to hurt. Then she exhaled, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Your grandfather Raymond is threatening to cut the whole family out of the will if they don't apologize to you." The words landed like a stone in my chest, not because I cared about the money or some inheritance I had never expected, but because it explained everything. The sudden warmth, the friend requests, the message from my mother that pretended 8 years hadn't happened. It wasn't love. It wasn't regret. It was fear of losing something they valued more than me. It turned out that for all these years, my family had lied to my grandfather about what really happened back then. They told him that I had cheated on Brooke, that I was the one who destroyed the relationship, and then, in a fit of rage, I had brutally attacked Logan, beating him so severely he needed medical attention. In reality, I had only hit him once. One punch to the face after finding out he'd been sneaking around with my girlfriend for months behind my back. There was no brawl, no sustained attack, just one moment of hurt and betrayal boiling over. But they had spun the story, twisted it into something ugly enough to justify cutting me off, ugly enough to turn Grandpa against me. And for years he believed them. He believed that I was the one who tore everything apart. When Karen finally sat down with Grandpa Raymond and told him the truth, that Logan had been the one who betrayed me by secretly dating my girlfriend, that I had only lashed out once in a moment of heartbreak, and that my parents had responded not with support but by kicking me out of the house, he exploded. She told me later that he stood up from his chair, red-faced and shaking, unable to believe how deeply he had been manipulated. All those years he had kept his distance from me, thinking I was the one who shattered the family's trust, when in reality, I had been the only one left standing in the middle of the wreckage. That conversation flipped everything. Grandpa Raymond made it clear that unless the rest of the family made peace with me, unless they acknowledged what they had done and took steps to make it right, they would be cut from his will completely. No negotiations. No exceptions. And now, all of a sudden, I'm receiving these strangely warm invitations, messages laced with friendliness that feels so artificial it almost makes me laugh. They don't want me back because they're sorry or because they've had some heartfelt change of conscience. They want me back because they're afraid. Afraid of losing what they think they're entitled to. They see me now not as the outcast they abandoned, but as the key, the bridge between them and millions they once thought were guaranteed. Every message, every friend request, every awkward attempt at reconciliation is just a move on the chessboard. They're not reaching for me, they're reaching for money, using me as the stepping stone to climb back into Grandpa Raymond's good graces. And the most pathetic part is, they actually think I don't see it. I blocked them all, every message, every request, every shallow attempt at pretending the last 8 years hadn't happened. I didn't need their apologies wrapped in greed or their sudden affection born out of fear. I have my family now, the one that actually matters. I have Kelsey, who has stood by me with unwavering loyalty and love, who carries our second child with grace and strength even in the face of the chaos others tried to drag into our lives. I have Ellie, our daughter, who greets every morning with wide eyes and unfiltered joy, reminding me that the past doesn't get to define the future we're building. And I have Aunt Karen, the woman who opened her door when everyone else slammed theirs, who didn't just give me a place to sleep but helped me rebuild my entire life, brick by brick, until I could stand on my own. She didn't let me break down when it would have been easier to collapse, and because of her, I know exactly what real family looks like. But 3 days after the new year, just as life had started to quiet down again and the last of the holiday decorations were coming down, I got a call from Grandpa Raymond. His voice sounded older than I remembered, slower, softer, like the weight of everything he hadn't said had finally settled on his chest. He apologized without hesitation, without excuses. He said he had been wrong, that he had believed lies because it was easier than facing the possibility that his own children had failed me. And then, almost in a whisper, he said he wished he had been there, at my high school graduation, at my wedding to Kelsey, at the hospital when Ellie was born. He said he had missed too many moments that mattered, not because he wasn't invited, but because he didn't know the truth. And now, knowing it, he just wanted me to hear it from him. He was sorry and he wished he had chosen differently. But then, just as I thought the conversation might end on a rare note of honesty and reconciliation, he added one more sentence, calm, almost casual, but sharp enough to cut straight through everything. "It's a pity your daughter doesn't carry the family name," he said, like it was some quiet disappointment, like that alone somehow tarnished everything I had built on my own. And in that moment, something in me snapped. I had sat through his apology, I had listened to the regret, and I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that he was finally seeing me for who I was, not who they had painted me to be. But with that single line, I realized he hadn't changed as much as I'd wanted to believe. "You want to control me through your inheritance?" I said, my voice low and steady. "It won't work." And then I hung up the phone. I stared at the screen for a moment, the silence ringing louder than his voice ever had. And I knew without hesitation that if anything from that inheritance ever comes my way, I won't keep a cent. I'll donate every last dollar to charity, to a cause that helps people who actually need support, not those who try to buy loyalty with guilt and money. Because the family name didn't raise me. It didn't protect me. It didn't choose me when I needed it most. And I'll be damned if it defines my daughter or the life we're building together. I refused their carefully staged Christmas reconciliation, and that's when the real show began. It was as if the masks finally slipped and the truth spilled out, not with honesty, but with venom thinly disguised as disappointment. My sister Madison, who hadn't spoken a word to me in 8 years, suddenly found her voice in the form of a long emotional message, pages of polished outrage and self-pity, accusing me of being selfish, cold, and ungrateful. She wrote that I was tearing apart the family unity, that I was the one driving a wedge between people who just wanted to make things right, that I was letting old wounds fester when I should have been the bigger person. As if they hadn't spent nearly a decade pretending I didn't exist. As if they hadn't thrown me out, erased me, and stood by while lies were told in my name. As if the people who watched me struggle in silence suddenly had the right to decide when it was time for healing, and on what terms. She spoke about unity like it was something sacred, conveniently forgetting that it was already shattered the day they turned their backs on me. And now that their inheritance was on the line, they expected me to glue it all back together, smile through the cracks, and pretend nothing had ever happened. But I wasn't the one who destroyed the family. I was just the first one who stopped pretending. A day later, my grandfather called me again, his voice calm, measured, but carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. Something heavier than disappointment, something like quiet heartbreak. He didn't speak in anger, and he didn't scold me for how I had handled things. In fact, I could feel it in the way he chose his words, in the pauses between them. He wasn't offended by me at all. He was offended by them. He told me, almost like he needed to say it out loud to make it real, that he had officially changed his will. Then, in a tone that was both resigned and deeply tired, he said, "I just wanted to see if they would have any conscience left." They didn't. It wasn't a dramatic declaration or a threat. It was the kind of truth that hurts more because it comes too late. He had hoped, despite everything, that they would do the right thing on their own. That they would come to me not because they were told to, not because money was at stake, but because something in them still recognized what they had done. But they hadn't. They failed that test without even realizing they were being tested. And for the first time, I realized that Grandpa Raymond wasn't just trying to fix things, he was mourning what our family had become. That evening, after the call ended and the house settled into its familiar quiet, I sat next to my wife on the couch, her hand resting on my leg, steady and warm, while I held our daughter in my arms, her small fingers wrapped around mine, her breathing soft against my chest. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: peace. It wasn't because of the inheritance, and it wasn't because of some bitter sense of revenge. It wasn't about proving anything to the people who had once discarded me or watching them unravel under the weight of their own choices. It was something deeper than that, quieter, more lasting. It was the peace that comes from finally choosing yourself. From knowing that I had drawn the line where no one else had dared to, that I had protected the life I had built from the noise and manipulation of the past, and that I had done it without becoming cruel or vindictive in the process. I looked down at Ellie, her little face tucked against my chest, and I knew that whatever happened next, whatever letters came or didn't, whatever names were left in the will, I had already won. Because this was my family now. This was my home. And for the first time, I knew without a shadow of doubt that I had become the man I needed to be. Not because they made me one, but because I chose to be.